Imagine stepping onto a luxurious first-class flight, expecting nothing but comfort and quiet, only to find yourself in the middle of a drama you'd never forget. That's exactly what happened when five wealthy businessmen found themselves sitting near a quiet, unassuming man, one they didn't recognize at first. At first glance, he looked like just another passenger, dressed casually, minding his own business. But little did they know, the man they were about to mock was none other than Elon Musk, and their arrogance was about to cost them big time. It all started when the flight attendants began offering first-class service. The five men, clearly used to getting their way, spoke loudly, bragging about their wealth and business ventures, making sure everyone around them could hear. They looked around the cabin, sizing up the other passengers. That's when their eyes landed on him, the quiet man sitting alone, seemingly out of place. One of them smirked and nudged his friend. "Looks like a colony snuck in," he joked, just loud enough for others to hear. The others chuckled, throwing side glances in his direction. At first, the man ignored them. He kept his attention on his laptop, typing away, unfazed by their remarks. But that only seemed to irritate them more. "Must be one of those internet hustlers," another scoffed. "Thinks he's making millions from a laptop." Their laughter grew louder, attracting the attention of nearby passengers. Then, as if the universe had planned it perfectly, the flight attendant approached with a warm smile. "Mr. Musk, can I get you anything else?" she asked politely. Silence. The five men froze. Their faces turned pale as the name echoed in their heads. "Mr. Musk?" As in Elon Musk. The realization hit them like a freight train. They had spent the last 20 minutes mocking one of the most influential and powerful entrepreneurs in the world, right to his face. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, Elon finally looked up. Elon Musk slowly lifted his eyes from his laptop, his expression calm, almost amused. He wasn't angry. He didn't need to be. The weight of his name had already done the damage. The five men sat frozen in their seats, exchanging nervous glances, their confidence fading fast. The once loud cabin now seemed eerily quiet, as if the air itself had thickened with tension. One of the men, a tall guy in an expensive suit, cleared his throat and forced an awkward laugh. "Oh wow, we didn't realize." His voice trailed off as he fumbled for words. The others shifted uncomfortably, suddenly avoiding eye contact with the very man they had been mocking moments ago. Elon gave a small, polite nod, but he still didn't say a word. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, tapping his fingers lightly on the armrest. The flight attendant, sensing the shift in energy, gave a knowing smile and walked away, leaving the five men to stew in their own embarrassment. One of them, perhaps desperate to save face, tried to recover. "Well, we were just joking around," he said, forcing a chuckle. "Didn't mean any harm." But his voice lacked the confidence he had earlier. Elon finally spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, but carried a weight that made every word hit harder. "No offense taken," he said simply, his eyes studying them, as if sizing them up. "But it's always interesting to see how people treat strangers when they don't know who they are." His words hung in the air. The men knew exactly what he meant. They had judged him based on his appearance, dismissed him without a second thought, never realizing they were sitting feet away from a billionaire, an innovator, a man who had changed industries. The realization settled in, making them shift uncomfortably in their seats. The loud, arrogant men from before were now quiet, their energy completely different. And yet, Elon wasn't done. He glanced back at his laptop, typing a few words before looking up again. This time, with a slight smirk, he asked, "So, what do you guys do for a living?" The question hung in the air, simple yet piercing. The five men, who had been so eager to flaunt their success just moments ago, suddenly struggled to find their words. They had spent the last half hour talking loudly about their wealth, their businesses, their expensive vacations, boasting to anyone who would listen. But now, with Elon Musk staring right at them, waiting for an answer, None of that confidence remained. The man in the expensive suit, who seemed to be the leader of the group, forced a tight smile. We run a tech investment firm," he said hesitantly. His voice lacked the arrogance it once carried. The others nodded along, as if hoping to blend into the background. Elon raised an eyebrow. "Tech investment, huh?" He tilted his head slightly. "Interesting. What kind of startups do you invest in?" One of the men, a stocky guy with slicked back hair, cleared his throat. "Mostly early-stage companies. We look for, scalable businesses with high growth potential." He was trying to sound impressive, but there was a nervous edge to his voice. Elon nodded, his expression unreadable. "Sounds like a solid strategy." He paused for a moment before adding, "Any companies I might have heard of?" Silence. The men exchanged glances, their confidence crumbling by the second. The truth was, they had no real investments in groundbreaking companies. Their firm mostly chased trends, looking for quick profits rather than real innovation. They weren't visionaries. They weren't builders. And now, they were sitting face to face with a man who had built Tesla, SpaceX, and so much more. Someone who didn't just invest in the future, but created it. One of them finally muttered, "Nothing on your level, of course." Elon leaned back, studying them. There was no anger in his expression, no need to humiliate them further. The reality of the moment was doing all the work. These men had walked onto this flight thinking they were the biggest players in the room. Now, they realized they had been briding to someone who operated on an entirely different level, someone who actually shaped the future. And then, almost as if the universe wanted to drive the point home, a new notification popped up on Elon's laptop screen. One of his companies had just secured a major contract worth more than all 5 of their net worths combined. The irony was impossible to ignore. A tense silence filled the first-class cabin. The 5 men sat stiffly, their earlier laughter and arrogance completely gone. Their eyes flicked to Elon's laptop screen, where the notification still lingered, an unmistakable reminder of just how outmatched they were. None of them spoke. What could they say? They had mocked him, judged him, and assumed he was beneath them. Now they were trapped in their own embarrassment, forced to face the uncomfortable truth. Elon didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Instead, he simply studied them, his fingers tapping lightly against the keyboard. Then, almost as if he had already moved on, he turned his attention back to his work, casually scrolling through reports and emails. It was a quiet dismissal, but it stung worse than any insult. He wasn't angry. He just didn't see them as worth his time. The man in the suit cleared his throat again, desperate to salvage the situation. "So, you must be really busy, right?" he asked, forcing a smile. "I mean, running all those companies." He laughed nervously, hoping to lighten the mood. Elon glanced up, his expression neutral. "Yeah, but I enjoy it." His voice was calm, matter of fact. He wasn't trying to impress them. He had nothing to prove. That made it even worse. The men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The energy in the cabin felt different now. The passengers who had been listening in, the ones who had overheard their arrogance, were watching them with quiet amusement. Some even exchanged smirks. The tables had turned completely. Then, as if fate had a sense of humor, a man a few rows ahead turned around and spoke. "Mr. Musk," he said with an eager smile, "I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan of what you're doing with SpaceX. It's incredible." Elon nodded, offering a small smile. "Appreciate it," he said simply. The businessman continued, his voice full of admiration. "I actually run a small aerospace company, and your work has been a huge inspiration. If there's ever a chance to collaborate, it would be an honor." The 5 men watched in stunned silence. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Here was someone who genuinely respected Elon, someone who had built something of his own, and Elon actually engaged with him. Meanwhile, they had spent the entire flight flaunting their wealth, only to be exposed as empty talkers. And then, just when the tension couldn't get any thicker, Elon turned back to them with a curious look. "So tell me," he said, his voice calm but pointed, "what's the biggest risk you've taken in business?" It was a simple question, but for men who had built their success on playing it safe, chasing trends, and following the money instead of the vision, it felt like a trap. Their silence spoke volumes. Elon waited. The entire cabin seemed to wait. The next words out of their mouths would either save their dignity or destroy it completely. The 5 men hesitated, shifting in their seats as Elon's question lingered in the air. The biggest risk they had taken. It should have been easy to answer. After all, they had spent the entire flight boasting about their business acumen. But now, under his direct gaze, their minds were blank. The man in the suit finally spoke, his voice lacking the confidence it once had. "Well, we've made some pretty big deals," he started, choosing his words carefully. "A few risky investments here and there." Elon leaned forward slightly, his expression still unreadable. "Like what?" The man hesitated. We backed a few crypto projects early on," he said quickly. Elon raised an eyebrow. "And?" Another man, the one with slicked back hair, jumped in. "Some paid off. Some didn't. But that's the game." He chuckled awkwardly. Elon's lips twitched, almost as if he was suppressing a smirk. "So, no actual risk, just betting on trends." His voice wasn't harsh, but the words landed with precision. The men stiffened. The other passengers listened in, some pretending not to, others openly watching. The contrast between them and the man who had just praised Elon was glaring. One was a builder, an innovator. These 5, they were opportunists, and Elon saw right through them. Then, just as the tension peaked, something unexpected happened. The flight attendant returned, but this time she wasn't alone. A uniformed pilot followed behind her. The cabin, already thick with unease, grew even quieter. The pilot, a composed middle-aged man with sharp eyes, stopped near Elon's seat. "Mr. Musk," he said with a polite nod, "we just received a request from air traffic control. They've asked if you'd be available for a brief call upon landing. Something about an urgent matter." The 5 men exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued. An urgent matter. A direct request from air traffic control. Elon, unfazed, simply nodded. "Understood. Let them know I'll be available." The pilot nodded back and turned to leave, but not before sneaking a glance at the businessman. The look in his eyes was unmistakable. He knew what had been happening here. And now the 5 men weren't just sitting across from one of the most powerful men in the world. They were watching him get called in for something far bigger than they could even imagine. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just business. It was something serious, something global, and suddenly their petty conversation felt embarrassingly small. The 5 men sat frozen, their earlier arrogance completely stripped away. The weight of what had just happened, Elon Musk receiving an urgent call from air traffic control, only made them feel smaller. They had spent the flight trying to belittle him, only to realize they were in the presence of someone whose influence reached far beyond their world of flashy deals and shallow investments. Elon, still calm as ever, closed his laptop and stretched slightly, as if none of this was out of the ordinary for him. The businessman, however, couldn't help but exchange glances, their curiosity burning. One of them, the man in the suit, finally worked up the nerve to speak. "So, what kind of urgent matter are we talking about?" His voice was careful now, a stark contrast to the arrogance he had displayed earlier. Elon glanced at him, almost amused. "Just something about one of my satellites," he said casually. "There's been some unusual activity, and they want my input." The words hit them hard. They had mocked him, called him out of place, assumed he was just another passenger. And yet, here he was, handling global issues mid-flight, making decisions that could affect nations while they were still trying to recover from their own embarrassment. Then, just as the tension seemed to settle, the flight attendant returned, holding a piece of paper. She handed it to Elon with a respectful nod. "Sir, this just came through for you." Elon unfolded it and scanned the message. A flicker of amusement crossed his face before he looked up, directly at the 5 men. "Well, this is ironic," he said, shaking his head slightly. The men leaned in slightly, their curiosity now unbearable. "What is it?" one of them asked hesitantly. Elon tapped the paper lightly against his fingers before responding. "Turns out, your investment firm actually pitched one of my companies last year. You wanted in on a funding round," he smirked. "We passed." The color drained from their faces. The realization hit like a punch. While they had spent the entire flight acting superior, they had once tried to be part of Elon's world. And he had already decided they weren't worth the investment. For the first time, they had nothing to say. No excuses, no clever comebacks, just silence. Elon, unfazed, folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. Then, with the slightest smile, he leaned back in his seat, looking more comfortable than ever. The message was clear. They had spent the entire flight judging a man they could never compete with. And now, they would walk off this plane, knowing that the person they mocked had already dismissed them long before they even knew who he was. The hum of the plane filled the silence between them. The 5 men, once so full of themselves, now sat in quiet disbelief. Their entire perspective had shifted in just a few hours. They had mocked a man they didn't recognize, assuming he was beneath them. Now they knew the truth. Elon Musk wasn't just someone they should have respected. He was someone they had once wanted to work with, and he had already decided they weren't worth his time long before this flight even began. One of the men, the one in the expensive suit, let out a shaky breath. "Well, I guess that's business," he mumbled, forcing an awkward chuckle, but no one else laughed. They all knew this wasn't just about business. It was about character. Elon said nothing more. He didn't need to. The message had already been delivered without a single ounce of arrogance or anger. That, perhaps, stung the most. He had nothing to prove to them, and now they knew it. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing that they would be landing soon. The plane began its slow descent, and the 5 men sat back, each lost in their own thoughts. The energy in the cabin was completely different from when they first boarded. No more loud conversations. No more forced laughter. As the plane touched down, passengers gathered their belongings. Elon stood up, casually stretching as he prepared to leave. The 5 men hesitated, exchanging glances before one of them finally spoke. "Mr. Musk," he said, his voice quieter now, more genuine. "For what it's worth, we do respect what you've built." Elon turned slightly, giving him a small nod. "Appreciate it," he said simply. Then, without another word, he walked toward the exit. As the 5 men followed behind, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had just experienced something far more important than a flight. It wasn't just about meeting Elon Musk. It was a lesson, one they wouldn't forget anytime soon.